Welcome, everyone, to our podcast this week of the future of vascular health. It's my great privilege to have this week with me our special guests, Raymond and Analyn Scott, who are the founders of the 1 in 9 charities. And their mission is really to change the trajectory of kidney disease and save millions of lives. So they've got an extremely interesting, miraculous story that I want you all to hear about. So as you know, last week we focused on kidneys and why kidneys break down or what causes kidneys to fail. And so I thought this week it would be really helpful to put a human touch on it. And the miraculous thing is that Raymond has been on this journey for 27 years, and I'm going to ask them to share their experience. But this became their mission about 16 or 17 years ago, partway through this journey, really. So they founded the 1 in 9 Kidney Foundation, and then they've since written a book, and it's the 1 in 9 Tribe. And then really, Raymond was able to do a Dancing with the Stars thing in Arizona. His health was good enough, it allowed him to do that. And so they wrote a book. It's called Kidney Disease, Warriors Beating the Drum of Hope and Change. And then they also produced a documentary called A Dance with Destiny. And they also have a podcast that they do regularly called the 1 in 9 Tribe podcast. So really, their whole mission is really about educating people. There's a lot of people that they meet that are, last week we talked about the stages of kidney disease, 1 through total chronic kidney failure. And they do a great service teaching people about, well, what's stage 2 mean? What's stage 3 mean? What comes next after stage 4? Because they've lived through all that. And that's what I want them to talk about today. But the interesting thing is, and we'll explain how we met about 10 years ago, I think it was. But really, when I met Analyn, they had formed the 1 in 9 Kidney Foundation. The interesting thing, or the shocking thing, is when they formed this, 10, 12 years ago, the statistics in America were 1 in 9 people have kidney disease. Last week, I shared with you, those numbers have actually increased. So now they say it's 1 in 7. So, that's an alarming statistics, but that's why it's really important. I think part of our mission of what Hans and I have been focused on is the whole realm of vascular and microvascular health. And some of the earliest studies that we've done, we're focused on kidneys and kidney health. And so that's what we want to talk about today. So with that, I'm going to introduce, turn the time over to Raymond and Analyn. So I don't know where you want to start. I mean, I'd kind of like to hear, it's been 27 years. That's a long time. And so I'd kind of like to have you share your journey with our audience, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and I can't even believe it's been 27 years, and it's been a journey. Anyone that's dealing with kidney disease, it's not this straight line trajectory. It's these twists and turns and dips, and I'll tell you, as you were just mentioning, I'll just share with everybody that when we started 1 in 9 in 2015, we were shocked to learn that there were 26 million Americans, yet 90% were walking around, didn't know that they had kidney disease. That was Raymond 27 years ago when his kidneys failed out of the blue, and he had he crashed into dialysis at the age of 29. And they're actually saying right now it's 1 in 3 American adults are at risk for having kidney disease. And they're projecting by 2030 that, so I think right now it's around 37 million. I think it's actually higher than that, but they're predicting by 2030, 80 million Americans will have kidney disease. And that's not okay in my book. And so the things that we've learned over all these years is we want to help people to get more of an awareness and be empowered so they can avoid a journey. Because I know, Raymond, you can speak for yourself. It's not been an easy journey.
It has not been an easy journey. And I think one of the things that people forget or don't keep in mind is the mental and psychological things that happen to you while on dialysis. And there's times when people get depressed even. But I learned to use prayer and the support of my family. And I'm lucky to have it because I've seen patients who are doing this all by themselves. And I couldn't imagine being alone in this. But they are my support system. They are what motivates me. And I learned a lot about motivation being in the Army for 8 years. So I've been fortunate as a dialysis patient with the support that I've had and I've gained from not only my family, but friends of ours who are willing to step in when they're needed also. But it has to be a good support system that you need in order to get through some of these difficulties.
And that's something.
Yeah, so if I could just add something there, because I think the important thing that you just brought up is I don't think a lot of people understand really when people say dialysis, they think, oh, no big deal. But, I've met with the major dialysis companies in the world, and the information they shared with me is that basically the average life expectancy of a patient once they go on dialysis is no longer than 7 years. So, you're a walking miracle that you were doing dialysis that long. And I know you did some things to improve your chances, but I think you're absolutely right. Your fighting spirit, the support of your family. And I don't think people really understand the impact. So not only does it impact the patient, and so you could talk about this better than anybody, Raymond, when you have dialysis, and how often did you have to do dialysis? 3 times a week?
So yes, in the beginning, I was doing in-center, which is 3 times a week, 4 hours of pop.
So you'd go to a dialysis center, so you'd have to have somebody drive you there, and then you'd be there for 4 hours. Then you come home, and then I've had people I've talked to, you probably don't feel really good for another 24 hours. It's almost like you got beat up and had the flu, isn't it? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I describe it as running a marathon. You have to recover from it. So from that 4 hours of treatment, you go home, and I rested. I slept. I would go pick the kids up from school, come home and sleep. And I was missing out on a lot because I just didn't have the energy to, Daddy, let's go outside and play. Well, just give me an hour or so and I'll be ready.
Yeah, and so your kids at the time, how old were your kids? They weren't even born yet, were they?
One of them was, yeah, our daughter wasn't even born yet, starting on in-center. And so that's all they've really known. They've just known Dad on dialysis. And
so all your kids have ever known is Dad's on dialysis, and it's always been a scare for them. I bet it's been a little bit of an emotional roller coaster for them even.
it is. You mentioned our book, and even our children are co-authors in the book, and they shared things in the book that they hadn't even shared with us yet. Our son, who's now 20, but he was saying that every time Raymond would go to the hospital, he would wonder, is this the time Dad doesn't come home?
Yeah, and that's a scary thing. And so, so the other thing that's interesting to me is the financial impact. So I assume once you went on dialysis, that had a big impact on your ability then to provide financially for your family. So what happened with that whole thing as far as your ability to work since you were on dialysis so much? Did that impact your ability to earn a living?
It did, especially in the beginning. I was basically a contract employee, and I didn't have insurance or anything. But through the fight of my wife, through the VA, we were blessed. I mean, the VA stepped in, paid all the bills, gave me some, money to live on, and were instrumental in that first couple of years of battle.
Yeah.
So
kudos to the VA. The VA supported you as a veteran for the years of service that you gave to the country. And that made all the difference in your survivability, probably, and your ability to even fight on and pay for the care that you needed.
Right.
Absolutely. And I would say too, because it's, again, he's been on every single modality. So at first he was able to still work when he was on peritoneal dialysis. And then he had a transplant that lasted for 5 years. Now what he's talking about with the in-center, once he was in-center, he did go on, he was on disability. That was a full-time job. Just being able to recover after dialysis. And then we started in 2012 doing home hemodialysis 5 days a week. So we went from doing that 3 days a week to 5 days a week for about 2 hours, 45 minutes. And I would help him administer it. And that did make a huge difference in his life. It gave him, a lot of people don't understand that the heart and kidneys are really connected. And especially when you're doing dialysis, it's very hard on the heart. That's why a lot of people die typically of like heart attack, something heart related, cardiac related, or infections. And so every time you think about the fluids, you're going to go up and down, up and down. Well, at least doing at home, it was a little bit better. He was able to start working out. He was able to, as you mentioned, do Dancing with the Stars with the Arizona Kidney Foundation in 2016. Ironically, the night he danced was 18 years to the day that his kidneys had failed. And people are like, you're on dialysis? You don't look like you're on dialysis. But what you see on the outside doesn't match what's truly happening on the inside.
Right. So I just remembered something. Isn't today your birthday, Raymond?
Yes, it is. 7 years old.
57 years old. So I'd be remiss if I didn't. I just remembered that. I'd be remiss if I didn't wish you a happy birthday. So this is an extra special day for you.
Yes, and thank you for the birthday shout out. I appreciate it.
So Analyn, you mentioned something I want to go back and have you touch on this journey. So when he first was diagnosed with kidney failure or in the progression, you mentioned that he started on a certain type of dialysis, if I understood you right. Can you explain what that was and then how that worked and then why that wasn't successful and why you had to move to the next step, if you don't mind, just for our audience that help them understand?
Yeah, because this was all new to us.
Yeah.
What we've learned too is diabetes and high blood pressure are the two leading causes, like by far. And Raymond had high blood pressure. He knew he had high blood pressure. He was taking his medication, but we wasn't checking his blood pressure regularly. And so when I say he crashed into dialysis, he literally did. We had only been dating for 3 months and he's developed this cough. So he wasn't having, so for the audience, he wasn't having any symptoms prior to about a week before his kidneys failed. He developed a really bad cough. He threw up one time. He wasn't even really, if we look back, he wasn't having swelling in the ankles or holding, it didn't look like, oh my gosh, you're retaining this water.
So physically looking at him, you would never know that this was happening that bad.
Would never know. And of course, I was encouraging him to go get it checked. I said that cough isn't good. And he's like, I'm fine. And then, by the end of the week, he said, no, I'm going to go to urgent care on my way to work. And I probably have bronchitis. They'll just give me some antibiotics. So the nurse takes his blood, and we were supposed to have a date that night. It was a Friday night, Friday morning that he went in there. And the nurse checked his blood pressure and she's like, nah, checked it 2 more times and ran for the doctor. His blood pressure was 270 over 190.
Holy smoke. That's stroke range.
That's stroke, yes. Exactly. And they called an ambulance. Like, no, Mr. Scott, you're not going to work today. We've called an ambulance. We're taking you to the hospital. By the time he got to the ER, his blood pressure was 300 over 200. And they said, Mr. Scott, don't you have chest pain? You could have had a heart attack. Don't you have a headache? You could have had a stroke. He's like, no, just this cough. And he was right. He had bronchitis, but it was like 10th on the list. He had, renal failure, congestive heart failure, all these different things. But the only symptom he had was that cough. And they said, no, Mr. Scott, your kidneys have failed. We're taking you into surgery today. You're starting on dialysis tonight. He's like, what's dialysis? What is this? So we were very fortunate while he was in the hospital, because they had, do the port right through to his heart to be able to do the dialysis, get that fluid off of him. But very fortunate, while he was in the hospital, a nurse came and talked to him about peritoneal dialysis, which goes through the abdomen. And that allowed him more freedom. It allowed him to continue to work, allowed us to get married less than a year later and go on a honeymoon on a cruise. But we didn't even know at that time that even peritoneal dialysis, the average, that only lasts typically for about 3 years. And then you either have to go on, hemodialysis or have a transplant. And so he was fortunate at that time, when that stopped working, that one of his brothers was able to donate a kidney to him.
So about 3 years into it, is that when you got your first kidney transplant?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And that
So
lasted
tell us about how that went.
I call it 5 years of freedom, and I felt blessed to have those 5 years. Even though, in dialysis terms, I don't even know what they expect.
I think back then,
Living donor.
living donor. I think back then the average expectancy of, because a lot of people think, oh, great, you got a kidney. That's it. You're done. And you're dealing with the anti-rejection medications. You're dealing with, a compromised immune system. We're not sure why the kidney failed, but the body's always trying to, reject it. And I think at that time it was maybe 7 to 10 years, maybe 12 years for living donor. But we were blessed to get the 5 years.
So you got the kidney transplant and it went really well for the next 5 years. It gave you the freedom, allowed you to get your family started, all that kind of stuff. And then so I know there were some complications from the medications so you didn't reject the kidneys. I think one of those was it made you insulin dependent as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, no, your memory is correct. That was 6 months after his transplant. So
yeah,
like April of 2002. So he was Raymond doesn't do things small. He doesn't do things small. So they were still checking him, after the transplant, and he was on not only the anti-rejection medications, but steroids, pretty heavy doses of steroids. So same thing, he went in for his blood work before going to work, and he gets to work, and they're like, dude, you look horrible. And he's like, yeah, I don't know, maybe I have the flu. And like, yeah, go home. They called us the next day and said, get him to the hospital, his blood sugar's 1,000. So, and then he became insulin dependent from the transplant. And he was
so that was about what, 8 years into your journey that you became insulin dependent, if I'm thinking about our current.
Yes, that's 3
close
years.
to that. Yeah, close to actually about 4 years into our journey. It was about 2002.
It's about
5 years into our journey. So he wasn't diabetic prior to this.
yeah.
It was just the high blood pressure, and then he was dealing with the high blood pressure and diabetes plus the dialysis.
Right. And so then tell us about when your kidney failed. Then how long was that then when your kidney failed into the journey?
So that was that lasted, so it was about 2006.
To about 2006. Then your kidney failed. And so then you had no choice but to go back on dialysis again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is that when you were doing the in-clinic dialysis?
Yes.
And even that's pretty miraculous, knowing the statistics that we know now.
Yeah, that's why I want to talk about it.
He did in-center dialysis for 6 years. And it's interesting, when we had been, someone had mentioned the home hemodialysis earlier, but we were misinformed. And if they would have told us, we would have known the health implications. We would have jumped on it sooner. But we started that in October of 2012. And that was, in the training, he was doing 3 days a week. And I think it was his second treatment day. And he came home and he said, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I mean, and he looked better. He looked better.
Just doing it regularly for shorter times. It didn't wipe you out as bad. So then you're on the home dialysis for how many years on this journey?
That's 17.
No, it was a little over 12 years, because we just got you know, his kidney transplant.
Right. So, you know,
But
I honestly, until I met you guys, and then, you know, I came down and we become really good friends, even though, you know, you're my second cousin. But I've been really interested in Raymond's journey. And, you know, I've been at your house when you've had, you know, it's okay, time out. We got to do Raymond's dialysis. So I watched the process, and I don't mean to embarrass you, Raymond, but would you mind rolling up and showing people your arm that you do the, I mean, that's the one thing that blew my mind when I saw your arm.
yeah, and a lot of people, they just, you know, even our kids and friends would be like,
I
what's
hope you
that?
don't mind me
for?"
asking you to do this, because I just want people to see, you know, how what you've gone through. It's kind of amazing to me.
Really is. This is his lifeline. So I
Oh,
don't know if people
so you
can.
see that big, see those all those places on his arm? So that's where you would plug in for the dialysis, right? Into your artery in order to be able to do the dialysis. And
it's from those years of sticking, I stay away from the lumps and kind of go through the valleys and the caverns where it's safe to go.
right.
So this is my lifeline, or was my lifeline. So I had to guard it, and I'm the only one that touches this arm.
No, I can see why.
They can't do blood pressures, they can't do sticks, you know, that's, so think about it, they put, it's like a main highway, right? So they put all these arteries together, so it's a lot of blood flow that goes through. So, and he would stick himself with the needles. So I wish I would have looked at the numbers prior, but it was, I think when I counted it up, and you think about it, he's putting 2 needles in at a time, 5 days a week. I mean, it was easily over 6,000 needle sticks that he's had to do.
Yeah. And so, you know, I'm just, it's just when I stop and think about that you have to do that yourself. And I look at where you, I mean, I watched you do it, and I'm like sitting there and I'm going, oh my gosh, this guy's like the toughest guy I've ever watched. So I just, thanks for doing that. I really appreciate that. So let's continue on your journey. So, we met kind of, I guess, at your grandmother's funeral, who was my aunt. So do you want to just talk briefly about how that came to be, and then how that led to our journey together?
Yeah, and you know, it's really interesting because that was in 2016, and I remember when my grandmother was the end of her life. My mom was up there with her for like the last week or last couple weeks of her life, and you know how my grandmother was a little stubborn at times, and she actually passed away on our anniversary, which was on a Saturday, January 30th, and of 2016. And my mom had been there, like I said, and my grandma thought she was gonna die earlier, like Tuesday that week, and she woke up like upset, like, why am I still here? Like almost like, hello, I've got somewhere to be. I've got an appointment. She was angry. And so she was ready to go, and she had lived a great life, as you know. And so we came up for her funeral a week or so after her passing. And yeah, we let me even back up before even saying this, because it was a year prior to that we had started 1 in 9. And I was very intentional when we started that to have the 3 pillars of awareness, prevention, and regenerative medicine. So we've been doing the things with our organization and what have you. So when we were at the funeral, we were having the family luncheon afterwards, and your mom, my great aunt, came up and said, Analyn, you're doing something with kidneys, aren't you? I said, yes. She was, come with me. So I remember so clearly, we followed her over, and you're sitting at a table, and she goes, this is my son, Bob. Bob, this is your cousin, Analyn. And she like walks away. And the only thing we connected the dots was like, okay, kidneys. And I explained who we are, what we're doing. And you're like, oh yeah, I get it. And we started talking about, you know, all the research and the things that you'd been doing. And I remember you saying, you know, talk about the nutraceutical and talking about the glycocheck. And, you know, you had it in the car. As you're hearing more about Raymond's journey, I saw your reels turning like, oh, I can't wait. And, you know, to all the viewers, I promise we didn't do the glycocheck at my grandmother's funeral, but we did the next day. And, you know, clearly, I mean, that right there, my grandmother gave us her final, like a gift from heaven in this introduction. and what came after that.
Yeah, so I remember, you were staying at your brother's place up in Park City, so I drove up there and met with you and your family, and then I tested you, I think, and then I tested Raymond, and I don't know if you remember or not, but Raymond's the first person I've tested hundreds of people. He's the first guy I couldn't complete a test on because I couldn't see any vessels. There was nothing there. And so I'm like going, holy crap, this is this. And so then they told me your story, and I said, so then I told you, so I said, I've been working on this. So what do we do about it? And I said, I'd love to support you on this journey. And I'd kind of love to see if this nutraceutical that, Hans and I have been working on over the years, if we could make a difference in Raymond's health. And so we gave you some product, you went home, and then some interesting things happened in the months right after that. So I think there were 3 things that happened that were, I think, amazing to me. One was your blood pressure. So I want you to talk about that. Second one was what happened with your insulin dependence. And then the third one was, I remember you called me in the panic one night, and you said, oh, Raymond's in the ICU. He's developed sepsis. And so, what another complication of dialysis people don't understand is the potential for infections. And sometimes the infections or the related things are what take people out. Sepsis is a big. And so I just want, we don't have a lot of time, but if you just touch on those 3 events and what we learned together as we went through that, because to me, it was like, oh my gosh, this is proven that we can do something about this.
Well, so when we were there in Park City, you had just gone through your whole presentation showing us the studies that had been done, and this research all around the world, and one of the studies with sepsis and how they could predict which patients in the ICU based on their microvascular score, which patients would live and which patients would die. And like you said, you just couldn't even get a score off of Raymond. And so he started taking the supplement right away. And I remember you saying, I know it says take 4, I want you taking 6 a day. And just a few months later, so what was funny, when we met, this was about a week or 2, about 2 weeks before Raymond did Dancing with the Stars. And
I remember.
So we got him, he looks fantastic, looks great on the outside, did his dancing, retired the shoes, and went back to his normal routine of, just working out, at home and what have you. So nothing else had changed other than him introducing the supplement. And so fast forward to Memorial Day 2016, he developed a fever. So we don't play with fevers. We take him down to the VA emergency room, and they're like, yeah, it looks like you have pneumonia. We're checking you in. Well, it wasn't pneumonia. He ended up having severe sepsis and respiratory failure. They had to intubate him, and he was intubated for about 4 days. During that time, and let me just back up a little bit. Prior to that, and this is something that you had mentioned, that most people will start to see an improvement in their blood pressures, and within a couple of weeks. We experienced that. So he was on 3 blood pressure medications, insulin daily at the start of this, right? Mm-hmm. And within about 2 weeks, his blood pressure started coming down. So he worked with his doctor to titrate, and his doctor reduced one of the medication doses. And then within about 2 months, his doctor knocked off one of his blood pressure meds. Over the course of about 9 months, he came off all of his blood pressure medications and was, averaging like 110/70. So at this point,
and that's really important, because as part of the dialysis process, what you're measuring during that whole period, I remember watching, is you're keenly aware of what your blood pressure is. So you know what your blood pressure is during that whole process.
Yes,
absolutely. Yeah. So we were monitoring all throughout the process every day, so we were able to really watch that. And so here he is back in the hospital with the sepsis episode. And while he's intubated, he can't speak for himself. This nurse comes in and gives him a shot. What's the shot for? And I said, oh, it's his insulin. I go, but he's not eating. And they said, well, yeah, but he's insulin dependent. And I was like, it just didn't sit right with me. And thank God something kept me there longer than I anticipated being there. And sure enough, I look over at him when I'm eating my dinner and he's sweating, and I felt his forehead. He was cold and clammy, and I knew what that meant. So I called for the nurse, and sure enough, his blood sugar had dropped into the 40s. And they had to give him glucose and bring him back up. And had I not been there, he probably would have died. And so I told them, I was like, look, put it in the records, put it in the report. Do not give him any more insulin unless he needs it. I don't want any more mistakes. And they're like, yes, Mrs. Scott. From that point forward, he did not require any more insulin. And so from that point moving forward, he was no longer on any diabetic medications from like June of 2016. So that was miraculous to us.
Yeah. So as Hans and I kind of discussed, okay, what could have happened there that could have made that miracle happen? The only thing we could figure out is that we were able to restore the microcirculation or capillaries in your liver enough that your liver kicked back on and started producing enough insulin so that your body could support itself the way it was supposed to.
Yeah, because it goes through all the organs. So I think it helped with the liver, the pancreas, we didn't really have an expectation to help with the kidneys, right? I mean, for him, obviously, you and I both know we've had experience, even with my mom, who it's improved her kidney function. But I think you're right, because the glycocalyx, as we learned, goes through all those organs. And so we experienced that. And obviously, he's still alive, right? He survived sepsis. And
right.
That call I think you were talking about was even about a year or so later, because we had just experienced that. And out of the blue, he had an episode that mimicked, I'm seeing the blood pressures go down, scary, scary low, called, the ambulance, all of these things. So I told you, I said, I think it's sepsis. What should we do? And we had a miraculous turnaround with that of implementing a protocol, a sepsis protocol, really, really quickly.
Yeah. So what I told you, as I said, well, let's just give him, I said, let's put him on 12 a day. And so you talked to the doctors, and how he was out of there in a very short period of time.
Yeah, they were amazed. And also to have I think this is important for your viewers. I think this is very, very important. Number one, you have to be your own biggest advocate. And always good to have a bulldog in your corner, right?
Yes.
But be your own biggest advocate. And this was something like we came in informed, right? I jumped in the ambulance with him. I had the bottle of the supplement, and I had our book, which shares his testimony. So I was able to show some of the science and show to the ER doctor what had happened previously when he had sepsis. And he's like, oh, that's really interesting. We don't normally see this, sometimes for years when it comes out in some of the journals. And so he actually put it in the orders for him to take 4 capsules every 4 hours. That was on a Wednesday night. They moved him up to the, even when we were in the ER, we already started to see improvement from the first dose. And they moved him up to ICU on that Wednesday night. By the next afternoon, they're like, you're too healthy to be in the ICU. They moved him back onto a normal floor, and he came home that Saturday. I mean, it was incredible. And we're very grateful, because a lot of people don't survive sepsis. And so to have that quick of a turnaround, we know what it's done. The other thing I'll make mention of is when we were seeing all of these improvements for him, I got really curious, and I said, let's go get a second opinion, because he was not eligible to be on the transplant list because he had narrowing of a main artery that goes up through the thigh and blowing up to the kidney, and they couldn't put a stent in. And so they said,
hadn't his progressive,
you won't get enough blood flow to your kidney, you're not eligible for a transplant.
right? So the progression of his disease, the natural outcome was that all of his arteries became stiff. He had plaque, narrowing of the arteries and everything. So they told him flat out he'd never be a candidate for a transplant, right?
Yeah, they said, we're sorry, we can't stent, you just won't get enough blood flow. And
so, I remember telling you, I said, well, one of the interesting things I'm seeing with people is sometimes we see a reversal, and we see a emergence of the arteries or that were stiff and blocked over time, as we restore the glycocalyx, it seems like they become elastic again, and then we restore flow. And so just talk a minute about that journey, because we're running out of time. And then let's talk about the good news that led to the journey to be able to get a transplant, because, you know, at that point that you're talking about, really the only hope you had for the future was that he'd stay on dialysis and continue the lifestyle that you had. It wasn't even in your thought process. But I remember you have a lot of faith, and you always would tell me there's a miracle in her future. I know something miraculous is going to happen. And so tell us about that.
Yeah, so I said, let's go get a second opinion. And we went to the VA, actually, to their vascular specialist. They did a whole vascular workup. And I told them, you know, what they had found before, and that was keeping them from being eligible on the transplant list. They did the whole workup, and they said, I don't know what you're talking about. There is no stenosis. There is no narrowing. There is complete blood flow there. I don't see why you can't get on the transplant list. And so that opened that door. And
How long ago was that, by the way?
you know, that was actually probably about 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. And to be honest with you, I think also, you know, because we really do rely on our faith. And at that time, even God was like, it's not time yet. It's not time yet. But once he did give the green light, and he said, now it's time, we got Raymond on the list about 3 years ago. And and then we were just blessed and God promised us a perfect match for him, because he's also a very difficult match because of his first transplant. And we got the call January 23rd of 24, and they flew us, the VA flew us out. January of 25, January of 25. And they flew us out the next morning, January 24th, to Houston for his transplant at the VA. And we couldn't have planned a better gift. It was a few days before, as we talked about, the gift my grandma gave us on our anniversary. So January 30th was our 26th wedding anniversary. We just gotten this kidney, and that was, you know, then February 20th rolled around. It was 27 years since his kidneys failed. And then, you know,
And I remember I was in Florida, and I got a text from you guys saying, hey, good news. Raymond just had his kidney transplant. I going, are you freaking kidding me? That's like incredible. And then then the next day I called you. You say, here's Raymond, look, he's up walking around. And so so tell us about what the reaction has been from the medical community about they've never seen happen what's happened to Raymond. Is that a true statement?
That's a true statement. And I mean, every nurse that would walk in or doctor would come in, they were like, look at him, like, are we in the right room? And him walking around, doing his rounds. And they're like, you're incredible. Our patients don't look like this. And especially 27 years, are you kidding me? And even just with all of this, they said, this is a miracle. And we're very blessed that we have a really great medical team that, you know what, this is Team Raymond. So we're all working together. We're kind of the quarterback, but we've got the team. And so we've even, as you know, because I have a GlycoCheck device, I took that with me. That was one of the items that went on the jet with us for his transplant. And I've been doing his measurements along this journey to be able to see how is this going off of dialysis and now having a kidney that's working. How is just that impact on his vascular health? So this has been interesting. And then the doctors there, because we were talking about it prior to transplant of what we've been doing for Raymond. So they're intrigued. I got to show some of them the GlycoCheck device in action and the reports, and they're like, wow, this is interesting. And so it's giving us another data point that the hospital doesn't even have, that
Right.
we're measuring how well Raymond is doing now.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story. And, you know, we've only touched on the bits and pieces of it, but I hope our audience gets an idea of, you know, number one, what a trooper Raymond's been, how blessed your family has been. And, you know, the thing that strikes me the most about this, and it goes back to President Trump. I know let people have their opinions, but a lot of people don't know this. In the first presidency of President Trump, there were people that were dying from different conditions, and the FDA or different medical organizations wouldn't let them have treatments or experimental treatments. So he signed an executive order. It was called the right to try. And his philosophy was, if you already say they're going to die anyway, what do you care if they experiment? And if it's good news and something great happens, isn't that a blessing to everybody? And I really appreciated his perspective of that, because I feel like, especially on kidney disease, when the first people I figured out we could improve kidneys on have all been members of my family or very close friends. So my mother's 94th birthday is coming up. Well, when I first started on this journey, she was at the last stage of kidney failure, her GFR, and her doctors told her, you're either going to have to go on dialysis or get a kidney transplant. And that's like 15 or 16 years, about 16 years ago. And so I've had her on my different nutraceuticals that I've developed. And the crazy thing is, her GFR now is in the 80s, which, that would be considered really healthy for a 94-year-old female. And the other crazy thing is she's had asthma her whole life. I remember most of her life until I started putting her on some of my stuff, she would be in the hospital for probably 3 or 4 weeks out of the year with asthma, severe asthma. She couldn't stay out of the hospital. The crazy thing is she hasn't been hospitalized for the asthma in all these years. And so the miracle is, to me, is I do believe, I told you, I tell people, there's days I feel like we're Lewis and Clark, and you're part of our expedition. When I say it's Lewis and Clark, I honestly think, okay, we know the Pacific Ocean's out there, and we know we're going to end up there, but we don't know what we're going to encounter. We don't know what streams we have to cross, what rivers we have to ford, what mountains we have to go over, how many Indians we're going to have to fight, all those things that happen. But, happy day, one day we saw the Pacific Ocean. And so what I say to people is the journey we're on is a journey to, I guess, break down the barriers of discovery and find out what's really possible to help people reverse chronic diseases and improve their lifestyles and live longer, but not only live longer, but live healthy, productive lives. I mean, you think about this, Raymond. So where you're at in your life now, think of the blessing you have in your life. Now you're getting to the stage where your kids are going to get out of school, they're going to go to college, and they're going to start to get married, and you're going to start to have grandkids. So you have a future ahead of you that is bright. You're going to get to see your family as it progresses and grows. And to me, that's a blessing from God, number one, but it's also a blessing to your wife's tenacity. I've seen her. She is a fighter, and she doesn't accept no as an answer. She's always coming up, and she'll lay awake at night and think of, okay, well, what about this? What about that? And so she's very deliberate, and you've been blessed to have her in your life, I believe, mightily, and that's a great blessing. And so together, I just have to say, you guys have been an inspiration to me, and I thank you for allowing us to have, you're kind of one of my, we do lots of experiments on you, and so far, we've had great results. So I've been blessed and happy to be part of your life. And I'll just end it there unless you have anything else to say.
Thank you, because if it had not been for your tenacity and fighting for this and getting this out, Raymond would not be here. I know for a fact Raymond would not be here today. And that's where I know we have an obligation to pay Grandma's Gift Forward. I can't say, oh, it's nice that I have my husband here and our children have their father. We have an obligation to save more lives, to help prevent this, this journey from happening, help keep them healthy, help reverse some of these diseases. And so I'm just so very, very grateful to be on this journey with you too, and being able to take this technology, take this, wearing my different hats that I am with the nonprofit, and then also with my Breakthrough Health Solutions, to take this, because I know without a shadow of a doubt, this is a missing link in the fight against kidney disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, and if we're going to change the trajectory of kidney disease and save millions of lives around the world, because this is a global epidemic, then we have to change the trajectory of diabetes and high blood pressure and heart disease. And I'll leave this final statistic with people as we started talking about what it looks like just here in the United States. Look at this globally. There are currently 850 million people worldwide with kidney disease. That's double the number of people with diabetes. That's 20 times the prevalence of cancer or people with HIV and AIDS. Why isn't it talked about more? And so thank you for allowing us to kind of share our story, and that this can reach somebody that maybe they think of themselves or a family member, and can share this podcast with them, and just have them go get their kidneys checked. Maybe they say, oh, I didn't realize I had these risk factors. And it's as simple as going to get, March is Kidney Disease Awareness Month, right? But we're doing the awareness year round. And so go to your doctor and just ask and say, I just want to get a baseline on my kidneys. And, the target for like your GFR, your glomerular filtration rate is 100. So when you go to look at those numbers, notice on the chart, this is what I'm talking about, be an advocate for yourself. They're going to say that it's greater than or equal to 60. Once you go below 60, that's technically stage 3.
You're in the steep decline mode.
Yeah. Stage 5 is kidney failure. So you really want your number to be, like you were saying, your mother at 94 is at 80. That's stage 1.
Well, stage 1 theoretically.
Theoretically, but that's still, to have that at age 94, and they were saying before she was close to dialysis, that's phenomenal. And so, but know your numbers. Is what I would say, because these are things we've had to learn. Take what we've learned over the last 27 years, what you've learned over all of these years. I think you're the canary. We're both kind of the canary in the coal mine of sharing this, that it's not too late. There is something that you can do.
Right. And so I really appreciate you coming on. And so that's why I wanted you guys to come on the show, because I wanted to, we talked about the numbers, we talked about what happens, but I wanted our audience to really understand the human side. Number one, it's been a tough journey, but number two, I wanted to tell people exactly what you just said, that it's not too late. And because I have people ask me all the time, Bob, is it too late? And I think people give up hope, and the human spirit, and that's what I admire about Raymond, is he never gave up. The human spirit to fight. He's a fighter, and that's why he's still here today. And that's what I admire about him and Analyn so much. And so thanks for joining us today. And next week, we'll get into more of the studies that we've done on kidney disease. And then the following week, we'll talk about that. So what do you do about it? It's not too late. And, share some of the research and science that we've done around that. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate you being here. If people want to learn more about the 1 in 9, what's your website?
So they can go to 1 in 9, that's the number 1, IN, number 9, kidneychallenge.com. And then we're also on YouTube at 1 in 9 Tribe. You can find our podcast and some other videos there. And then also on Facebook at 1 in 9 Kidney Challenge.
And then if they're interested in picking up your book on Amazon, it's also, they can buy a digital format or a paper format on Amazon as well still, correct?
Yes, they can. And that's 1 in 9 Tribe on Amazon. Correct.
All right. Well, perfect. With that, I think we're going to sign off, and appreciate you being here.
All right.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Bob.
Take care. God bless.
Thanks for listening to The Future of Vascular Health. Healthy vessels, healthy future. If you're ready to take charge of your health, it's time to check out Revasca. This powerful supplement is designed to protect your glycocalyx, the microscopic layer that keeps your blood vessels healthy and strong. Revasca can help support your heart health, improve circulation, and even reduce high blood pressure. It's also great for boosting brain function, keeping your kidneys healthy, and preventing vascular complications before they start. Think of it as a way to keep your body running smoothly so you can live longer, feel sharper, and stay active. Don't wait. Take the first step toward better health today. Visit glycocalyx.com to learn more about Revasca and how it can help you protect your future.